All right, well, good morning. Today we're going to look at Romans chapter 6. This is a chapter that is absolutely rich in great theology and practical Christian living, but it's also a difficult one to understand. Because today you figure out, okay, I'm dead to sin, but the question comes in, if I'm dead to sin, why am I doing it so much? Explain that one. And Paul does. He starts out with a heresy. In verse 1 he says, "What shall we say? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound?" And he knew what the Pharisees were going to say. Well, if it's all about grace, then why don't we sin a whole bunch and then God is even more gracious? But he says, basically that thought can only come from an unregenerate mind. Once you've met Jesus, you don't want to live like that anymore. And that's his point here. In verse 2 he says, "Certainly not. How shall we who died to sin live any longer in it?" Now, what does it mean that we've died to sin? In two ways we've died. We've died to sin's penalty, in that no longer are we under the penalty of sin, death. And we've died to its power. No longer do we have to sin. We actually now have a choice. He says in this passage, you were baptized into Jesus. Now, he's not talking about water baptism. He's talking about being identified with Jesus. In the Old Testament, the Israelites were baptized into Moses, we learn. In other words, they were identified with Moses. But when you were identified with Jesus, you were identified with his death too. And so he says, therefore you're supposed to walk in newness of life. Now he says in verse 6, "Knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin." He describes sin as slavery. And if you've ever been caught in a sin, you understand this real well. It is slavery. It's something that you get caught in and it's hard to get out of. And he says this doesn't need to be the pattern of your life anymore. So how do you make it not the pattern of your life? Look at verse 11. He says, "Reckon yourselves dead to sin." Because of this foundational truth that we've died with Jesus and been resurrected with Jesus, there's two things you're supposed to do. You're supposed to think a certain way. Reckon yourselves dead to sin. Think, I am dead. I'm dead to sin. A dead person can't commit the sin that you're tempted to do today. Say, I'm dead. I can't do it anymore. I'm sorry, I died with Jesus. And I was buried with Jesus. And I'm raised to walk in newness of life. And he says in verse 12, also, don't let sin reign in your mortal body. Instead, present your members to God. Now, how do you present your members of your body to God? Well, it starts out by presenting your mind to God. Lord, take my mind, take my thoughts. Help me think like you think today. Take my eyes. Help me to look at the things you want me to look at. Take my ears. Help me to hear people and understand them the way you want me to. Lord, take my mouth. I realize I have half as many mouths as I have ears. Let me not say as much as I normally do. Help me to say the things you want me to say. And Lord, take my hands. Let me serve people. Take my loins. Help me to have sexual integrity today. Take my feet. Help me to walk where you want me to walk, and my feet to take me where you want me to go today. Each member of your body, present them to God. And then in verse 15 he says, "Shall we sin because we're under the law but under grace?" Again, that same heresy. He says, certainly not. It's the strongest way of saying no way in the Greek that you could possibly say it. He says, instead, understand this. Whomever you present yourself to, you're going to be a slave to. You're either going to be a slave to righteousness or a slave to sin. But you're going to be somebody's slave. Choose. And today, as you start your day, as you start your day in reading the Word and in prayer, you're going to make a decision. I'm going to live for God today, or I'm going to live for myself today. And as you think you're living for yourself, really, you're living for the devil. Every day is a choice. And he says, for the believer, it's not even a choice. You died to that old lifestyle. And yeah, you can still act like you're alive to it and live in the memories of it, but you are dead to it. Now think like it and live like it. Well, I hope you'll read Romans chapter 6 today, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. God bless you.